We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Understanding Food System Vulnerabilities through Simulation Modeling. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Southwest Regional Food Business Center. And the Southwest Regional Food Business Center was a project that was funded by the USDA Regional Food Business Center program. And this project today is one of the really interesting projects we were able to do through the Southwest Regional Food Business Center. Our webinar logistics today are that all materials, including this recording and presentation, will be available on our website. Today's webinar will be recorded, and so you will be able to watch this after the fact. We encourage you to engage with us with your camera on if you'd like. Use the chat to ask questions and connect with other participants. We want this to be informal at the end. We will turn off the recording and have time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. And my name is Tracy Celio. I am the lead with the Southwest Regional Food Business Center at UC Agriculture and Natural Resources. And just to go over briefly the center's three pillars: our coordination, technical assistance, and capacity building. And those three things really are coordinating across programs, organizations, industry, nonprofits, so that we have less duplication and are able to share out best practices. Technical assistance is direct technical assistance to food, farmers, and entrepreneurs. And we really serve those small and mid-scale producers. And then capacity building is our last pillar, and that really covers the grant program that we have for small to mid-sized food producers. Our program was terminated back in September, but we are continuing with the work as best we can for the coming months. And so today's webinar is brought to you by UC Ag and Natural Resources. With that, I'm going to jump into introducing our speakers today, and we have a few. First, we have David Goldenberg. He's with the Food Safety and Security Institute at UC Davis, with the Western Institute for Food Safety and Security, which is part of the Veterinary Science Department. Along with David, we have colleagues Dr. Benny Osborne, who is the Director of Outreach and Training and Dean Emeritus at the School of Veterinary Medicine at UC Davis. And along with them, we have Heather Johnson, who works also with the Western Institute for Food Safety and Security and works directly with education and curriculum development. We have Nelson Alfaro Rivas, and he is with MOSIMTEC and is a simulation consultant who's going to be talking about really how this project was able to be deployed and give us the project impacts and outcomes. And then along with Nelson today is Saurabh Prakash, who's the co-founder and partner also with MOSIMTEC. And with that, I am going to pass the baton over to David, who is our first speaker today.
Thank you, Tracy. So as you mentioned in my introduction, I do food safety training, but in addition to that, I'm also involved in outreach to law enforcement and also to farmers. We have, as part of the Western Institute for Food Safety and Security, I want to hone in on the security side. It's not insecurity, meaning not enough food. It's protecting the food supply from intentional adulteration. And we had a grant for a number of years with the Department of Homeland Security on prevention of agroterrorism. And so I went around the country talking with producers and first responders and law enforcement about dangers of agroterrorism and try to come up with ways in which to prevent them. As part of that, this project came about through my contact with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI. They have an organization called InfraGuard, infra meaning infrastructure, guard, guarding the infrastructure. And I became a member of that organization many years ago, and they were looking for a food and ag sector chief. And what's a sector? The Department of Homeland Security has identified 16 critical infrastructure sectors whose assets are critical to the network and functioning of our country. I won't go through all 16, but they're such as chemical, healthcare, transportation, communications, information technology, and of course, food and agriculture. And there's a chapter here in Sacramento. I'm the Food and Ag Sector Chief for the for InfraGard Sacramento. And also, as it worked out, I became the Sector Chief for the National InfraGard which is out of Washington, D.C., but hosts all the other organizations under its umbrella. And I want to take you back, kind of the side story of how this all came about was back in March of 2020. And as may recall, we weren't quite in full lockdown from COVID, but it was beginning to take shape. And a question came from the leader of our sector chiefs, and she said, David, is there a model that can predict food shortages? And I go, I don't know. So I checked with my cohort, my supervisor, Dr. Benny Asburn. He was unaware. I went to CDFA Secretary Karen Ross, asked her, and she was unaware. So that begat a search for, is there a model that we could use to predict food shortages? And so there was one that we uncovered a number of years ago. It was Eco Health Alliance that built a study on a Ebola outbreak in 2014 in West Africa. But they had a kind of a minor model, and we built upon that with this grant that we got through the USD Regional Food Business Center. But as our country was beginning to go into lockdown, there were some events that became incredible, and there was one that to me is a kind of a shocker, and it happened to our dairy industry. In This was April 15th in 2020. There was a headline that why dairy farmers across America are dumping their milk. And if you go to the next slide, it shows a devastation of a producer just draining the milk out of the bulk milk tank and letting it go down the drain. And why? Because of the supply chain backup and going on in the country. Schools were locked down. There were no children in schools. Amusement parks like Disneyland, Disney World, or all the other amusement parks were shut down. Institutional buyers stopped buying milk. And this is more of the half pint containers. There was no need for it anymore. But the lines at the processing plant were still there and they couldn't change over fast enough in order to keep up with the supply of milk. I mean, cows didn't know that it was locked down. They keep producing milk. So there was an oversupply and under demand. And so it began a problem. Could we have developed a model that could have predicted this? Who knows? But we have one that we think can look at other aspects of a pandemic. And so, we have one that we have centered on, and that is with avian influenza and the highly pathogenic avian influenza that struck the poultry industry. And you may recall about a year or so ago, egg prices were extremely high because there was a lot of chickens being killed on the farm. Well, as we were beginning in this project, we had gotten word that there was a one dairy farm, maybe two, that some of the cows got sick with the avian influenza hypathic H5N1. And so we were beginning to wonder, well, if one or two herds became infected, could this become the next pandemic? And soon enough, and now we know that over 1,000 dairy farms have become infected with the H5N1 highly pathogenic avian influenza. So, with the funding from the Regional Food Business Center, we set out to build a model, and we couldn't come up with one that could encompass everything. So, this was more of a proof in concept. Can we develop a model that would mimic a dairy farm and then resulting impacts it would have not only on on the farm, but also elsewhere and down the road? And certainly, we know that with the dairy farms, a number of dairy workers became ill, and there were a few that died as well. And so, does the H5N1 have the ability to go over and become the next pandemic or the human pandemic? And so the story hasn't been fully written on that, and that's out there. And I think Dr. Osborne will kind of touch on that at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to hand it off to Nelson, who will take us onto the model and give us a description of how it came about and how we set it up and how it mimics what goes on a farm.
Thank you, David. I just want to confirm that you guys can see my screen. Okay, perfect. So let's get started. So I'm here to talk about the dairy farm disease outbreak simulation. So just to kind of give you a quick background. Um, m- I work for MOSIMTEC, so we are a modeling and simulation consulting firm who partnered for this effort. Um, I'm going to talk about give you a quick background as to simulation. What were the I know David covered them. I'm going to just quickly go over them again. The project goals, give you a little bit of background for the model itself, and then kind of walk through the analysis that we did. So kind of what is simulation? So really it's using creating a virtual representation of a system to answer questions using a virtual representation of a system as a tool to learn. So simulation has been around for decades. So it's used for strategic planning, for engineering, or even for day-to-day operations. Simulation helps accurately predict how system responds to a number of things. Most of the time they're flexible, so you can create a lot of what if scenarios. And really, like as I mentioned, it's a tool to help visualize, analyze, and predict system behavior. Over on the right, you see a range of different industries. It can be used to model supply chains, trailers, essentially any kind of system. If it can be described, it can be modeled. It's just a matter of time and effort. So I'm gonna jump onto the next one. So when is it appropriate to use simulation? We don't model just for the sake of modeling. Simulation is a good tool when it becomes too expensive or destructive or risky to actually perform a what if scenario. If you want to know worst case scenario for a business, you don't actually want to have to go through the worst case. You want to learn in a sandbox and safe environment. That way you take those lessons and you don't have to go through that experience. We also use simulations when systems are very complex and that there's a lot of unexpected change, a lot of things that could happen. You can run them through a simulation um, and then learn and take what happens in the simulation and see what you can expect. Kind of essentially remove some of the risk from operations. When there's incomplete data, you can use simulation to make best guesses and play out multiple options. And then also one of the big reasons for simulation is when you have a system that includes a lot of uncertainty and a lot of randomness. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into specifically that variability and randomness. So why does variability matter? I'm going to give you a really, really brief example that is just in the keeping with the theme of milk. So in this very, very quick example, I'm going to give you a hypothetical system. So let's say you have you have a system where you can milk one cow at a time that would take an average of 7 minutes, and you have a cow arriving every 8 minutes. So I'm going to give you going to give you a couple of numbers. So how would this system perform, right? What would be the average and maximum time in system for individual cows if this milking process could run for a 10-hour shift nonstop? How many cows could be milked? So in a best case scenario, if everything took exactly 7 minutes and 8 minutes, then every cow would only be in the system for 7 minutes. It would show up, there would be nobody in line, no other cows waiting. It would be processed in 7 minutes, and you'd get about 75 milked cows in that 10-hour shift. However, once we start adding variability to the milking time, so let's say it still takes an average of 7 minutes, but now it could take a little bit less, it could take a little bit longer. Well, then what happens? The average time in system for a cow will go up to 15 minutes. And then the number of milked cows you can get in that 10-hour shift will go down to, like, let's say 68 cows. And then the problem gets worse. Now, if you add variability for, hey, now your cows are not arriving every 8 minutes, and they're also not being milked exactly every 7 minutes. So now once you do that, once you factor in that variability, you're only able to milk about 61 cows in that same time period. So the sources of variability in a system come from many places, and that effect of compounding everything can be very dramatic. So we use simulation as a tool to capture all that and um, inform us as to what's going to happen. And one of the important things about simulation is that you can run this over and over again. You can run a month, let's say, 100 times, and you can have a risk profile for what would happen if you do multiple, what we call replications, and keep repeating that to see what happens. So I'm going to jump on into, now that I've introduced simulation, into our actual simulation project. So to give you a little bit of the project goals, so for this specific project, we simulated the operations of a small closed herd dairy farm. So closed herd, as in this farm did not purchase any new cows, any new heifers. Any animal that was new to the herd was born in the herd. We were trying to quantify the impacts of high path avian influenza, so disease outbreak, also known as H5N1 or bird flu. And we wanted to kind of quantify the benefits of biosecurity mitigation measures on a dairy farm. So those were the high level goals. So to give you a little bit of background, the simulation model was a proof of concept. So we were on a limited budget and timeline, but we were able to do quite a lot. The simulation model was flexible, so via Excel there are a lot of things that can be updated, such as the herd, how the disease behaves. That way, we are not limited to modeling. Well, as we learn more about this disease, we can change characteristics such as how long the disease affects the herd or an individual cow, how infectious it is. We can adjust that. The project, I'm not gonna ever claim to be a dairy expert. I had help from experts in the field, including a real dairy farm manager, WIFSS. So some of the folks on the call, including veterinarian and a veterinary pathologist, and then other stakeholders included biosecurity experts, along with the local and regional government officials. So some of the high-level assumptions that are important to understand that went into this model were that the focus of this was really the disease outbreak. So we're assuming that all the labor was handled, the equipment was functional, that we know that on a farm, cows are always getting sick because of it could be mastitis or it could be other small issues. But for the purposes of our model, we assume that cattle are healthy apart from the high path AI. As I mentioned, no new animals were introduced, and kind of going along with the theme from that picture, or not from the picture, I'm sorry, but if a cow is sick, milk from that cow we were deeming unusable. So yeah, other stuff about the model was that specifically dealing with the disease is that we weren't doing any reinfections, even though that would theoretically be possible in real life. We were also only considering the effects of acute infection. So that just really means that an infection like this can really go on for months and months and months. But we're saying, hey, like if it's a cold, we're just saying, hey, you're going to recover, or worst case, maybe the cow does not recover. We had that in the model too. But we're saying, hey, just in the short term. And then we are doing the math behind the scenes for the disease spread. Hey, if there's a percent probability that the disease spreads, we're not saying, hey, Joe touched this cow who then spread it to this other person. We're not getting into that quite level of detail. We're doing the math. So jumping into a quick demonstration. So as I said, what you're going to see is you're going to see some snippets from Excel where anything blue is going to be inputs. Then you're going to see a screen pop up, which is the actual simulation running. And then you're going to see green, which is going to be some outputs. So as I mentioned, the simulation is flexible. So anything can be controlled, including the sale price of milk. You can specify other farm manager decisions, such as how big does the milking herd size get before we start culling. We can define how infectious the disease is as using the scientific disease spread model variables, we're defining every single cow in the herd and every heifer, how far along they are as far as carrying their calf. We have breeding probabilities and frequencies in there, and we even have very flexible. We can even define the expected milk production of a cow depending on their day in milk, and include factors for variations from that. Behind the scenes, the model's collecting all that information and plugging it into graphs and charts where we can get valuable statistics on how much milk was produced, how many cows were sick at any particular point in time, and how does that impact the bottom line of the farm. So you guys kind of saw a quick run through of that. So kind of running through, and one other thing is, even let's say we ran January, we can run January multiple times and say, hey, we're not just running it once. We're not saying, hey, this is an outlier. We can give you, hey, 90% of the time the milk is going to fall between here and here. So we're confident. We can provide confidence in our results. So going into the analysis, how did we really approach our analysis? Well, we compared a baseline, so we added a toggle in the model, so to where we didn't have to infect the herd. We said, hey, the herd stays healthy for a certain scenario, and we compared that baseline case against various scenarios where the herd was infected, and we were able to vary the impact of that infection by varying two main aspects: infectivity of the outbreak and the milk yield reduction caused by the outbreak. So I'm going to define that a little bit further in later slides. But infectivity at a high level refers to how quickly the disease spreads through the herd. So that will indirectly impact how many animals do not survive. And that's really because, let's say you have a herd and all of your animals get sick at the exact same time. Well, that's a tremendous effort to simultaneously try to treat every cow in your herd at the same exact time. Due to limited resources, unfortunately, some of the cows might succumb just because of dehydration from the disease, just because you don't have an unlimited number of veterinarians to try to hydrate the cows as they're sick. So that's just an unfortunate reality. And then milk yield reduction is one of the aspects of what was observed with HPAI, in that after a cow's infected, for the rest of that lactation cycle for that cow, they're not producing as much milk as they would have. So that there's a percent milk reduction for that rest of that lactation cycle, and that impacts how many cows are culled from the herd. Culled is another word for removed from the herd, sold, unfortunately made into hamburgers. But that's that, and that happens because at the end of the day, farms are businesses, and you can't keep an underproducing and therefore unprofitable cow. So those were the main things that we were varying in the model. So to help the group visualize infectivity, this is a graph where we have the number of sick cattle over time. In our particular in the particular herd and farm that we modeled, had about 260, 270 cattle. And you can see the orange line would be infectivity in our high infectivity scenario. So that would mean that essentially the disease spread quickly through the herd. And you can see at about 30 days, 250 cows out of like the 260 were all sick around the same time. So that was essentially almost like a worst case scenario. And then you can see in medium infectivity, the infection spreads a little more slowly through the herd. You see maybe the peak of infection is happening closer to day 40, and it's not, almost all of the herd. It's about a little bit more than half, or more than half of the herd. And then in the low infectivity case, it's even the peak of the infection is even later. So one of the things about this was a proof of concept model. We didn't directly model biosecurity measures of the farm, but this is where we kind of abstracted that. So protocols such as isolating sick cows, being very diligent with cleaning and disinfecting equipment, controlling who visits the herd, these biosecurity measures and aspects, they should help infectivity, but you got to keep in mind that those aren't free. So those come at a cost. And those are the types of things that we tried to abstract in the model, but yeah. And then herd milk yield reduction. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of numbers. So in a best case scenario, let's say if on in an average cow, if it was the best case for an infection, let's say any cow infected with high path AI experienced 15% less milk for the rest of that lactation cycle. Or if it was a worst case, they might see up to 30% milk reduction for the rest of that lactation cycle. So this is still a little bit of the intro for some of the charts that we have. But if you see low 1 on the any of the charts, that signifies the infectivity was low, and then the 1 would signify best case scenario. And if you see something, for example, like high 3, that would be high infectivity and worst case for milk yield reduction. So like a 30% reduction in milk. So jumping into those results, I'm going to display a quick graph. So this graph is pounds of milk produced per day by the herd on the y-axis. And then on the bottom, you're going to see days after model start. So in this first line is the baseline. So this is the case where the herd was not infected. So you see the daily milk production kind of hovering around that 7,000 to 8,000 gallons per day. I mean, pounds per day. And then in our first scenario, low infectivity and the best case on milk yield reduction, you see the pounds of milk produced per day goes down quite a bit. As I bring on these other lines, these represent worse or more dramatic milk yield reduction. So in this case, the yellow line, this low 3, the milk yield reduction is 30%. So after infection, you see that the milk produced per day is still dramatically lower. It stays at 5,000 pounds for longer. And that effect is true even now in the medium infectivity case, but you can see the peak happens earlier. So the milk is reduced even earlier, and that happens even worse with the worst case. And then I finally bring on the high infectivity. So you can see how dramatic that is. So I'm gonna clean up the slide for a second. So the difference between the best case and worst case is quite dramatic. In the high infectivity case with the worst milk reduction, you're coming down to within 30 days from like 7,000, 8,000 pounds of milk per day down to just 1,000. So it is dramatic. And one of the things that you would notice is in this first window, I was only going to 120 days. But in this slide, how long does it take to recover from something like this? Well, the infection, all the cows were recovered by day around 56. But what you don't really see is that the herd that got infected doesn't really recover and produce the same amount of milk as the non-infected herd until almost a year, almost 300 days. So that effect of the infection lasts way longer than just the initial impact that you see. So that's the power of simulation, being able to visualize this and see the long-term impacts and play flexibly with those with these what if scenarios. So here's kind of in a table, or I mean a different graph view. If you summarized and added up the milk from all of those days, within that time period, the high infectivity, high milk yield reduction resulted in 25% less milk over the same period. So in a in a business with thin margins, that can be catastrophic. So just wanted to leave you with that. So on that note, I pass it off to Benny. You're on mute,
Thank
Benny.
you, Nelson. Yes. Okay. Um, Thank you very much. What we want to do now, if I could have slide 12, I believe. I want to take just a little bit of time and tell you a little bit about WIFSS and what it is really focused on. We were created about 25 years ago to address foodborne illnesses that resulted from produce. And prior to that time, it was felt that only foodborne illness resulted from animal products. But around, well, in the late 90s and the like, we started eating more and more raw vegetables. And all of a sudden, here were some of these same agents that were associated with animals was showing up in the lettuce and spinach and tomatoes and you name it. So the real focus of WIFSS was created to address the produce side of things. But because we as veterinarians still had the animal side of things, uh, it really brought veterinarians in to help look at produce to determine how some of these conditions could occur. And the same, in many cases, the same pathogens were involved. But I want to use now a new concept that has been out there for about 20 some years. And it's one that there's more and more interest in, globally speaking now. It's the One Health concept. And the One Health concept is one in which we're concerned about problems relating to health of people, animals, plants in the environment we all share, I should say. And if you look at this schematic, this is the model that we wanted to use and did use as we put together this simulation model. The One Health concept fits all of that. And if we now inject into this the fact of a pathogen, and that's the avian flu or bird flu, H5N1 virus, we can see how it begins to show that disease is not just from one species or from one type of food, but it's a issue that seems to fit into something much broader than we used to concern ourselves with. So if H5N1 is actually found primarily in migratory waterfowl, and these waterfowl, ducks and geese and that type of thing, actually migrate from the Arctic Circle to the Antarctic Circle each year. And as they do this, they all congregate at those two or around those two poles, and they, like many other species, including people, have influenza. And this is the avian type of influenza. But there's been concern over the years that maybe some of this mixes with human flu or flu in other species of animals. And if that's the case, there is a way, or has to be a way, in which these changes that take place. But just a little bit about the virus. Influenza viruses, genetics changes, and in some instances, about every 2 months. But this all comes about because two different viruses may get in the same cell in the body. And when they replicate and they repackage, they may exchange genetic information. And sometimes that evolves into a new type of a virus. And in this particular case, that's what has taken place. So as these birds migrate, they often will, of course, be out in the environment, and the viruses, at least these viruses in migratory waterfowl, are voided in their feces into the water, so they contaminate water with the virus. They can also spread it other ways, but that's one of the common things. So environment is involved in all of what we see here. But as the birds migrate, they often share areas with other animals, and it can be things such as wildlife. And wildlife now is really, there's probably 300 different species of animals that have come in contact and developed some type of a disease entity. For instance, over the last 2 years, the number of seals and marine mammals has almost been decimated along the eastern coast of the US because this virus got into them and was able to kill them. And as we look beyond that and look at domestic animals, we've known for, I don't know, a number of years now that bird flu has devastated poultry flocks around the world. And they estimate that maybe 300 or 400 million poultry, that's chickens, both meat chickens as well as egg-laying chickens, and turkeys have been lost in many of these countries. But that's led to food insecurity, and then you've got the loss of the birds. So food insecurity then means that there may not be eggs on the shelf in stores. The other side of it is that, interestingly enough, about 15 months or so ago, there was a strange illness showing up in Texas in dairy cows. And people had never thought that bird flu could end up in dairy cows, but it did. And one of the things that was recognized that there were a number of dead songbirds and other birds, crows and the like, in dairy feedlots or pens. And they began to say, well, maybe this could be a flu. And it turned out that that was the first isolation of H5N1 from dairy cattle in Texas. But it spread rapidly to the other major dairy areas in the US. And as David pointed out, over 1,000 dairies have been in various states, particularly with concentrations of dairy cattle, that they have experienced this problem. And it fits and is really the model that has been used here to demonstrate the impact it has on dairies. Now, the other thing is, and David pointed this out, that it meets the One Health concept that we're talking about because people are even involved. And dairy workers or people around dairy animals or even poultry operations can come down with flu-like symptoms. And it often is not until more recently been checked for H5N1. And so now we know that it does cause, and some of the farm workers and people in association with these animals, could be veterinarians even, that can get ill. So that's what takes place and is the concept of One Health. And so what we at WIFSS want to do is we've gone a long ways and really producing safe and safer food, but we can have the introduction of new pathogens or new agents that will cause disease, say, such as H5N1, into a food cycle. And this is just an indication of what an emerging disease is all about. And it's hard to all of a sudden know what to do with these types of things. So it's a new entity that is impacting production and providing safe food. Now, in dairy cattle, one of the important things is that the virus will find its way into the udder where milk is made. And the virus is shed in quite high quantities in cows that are infected with it. And with that, they can pass it on to their calves. But oftentimes, dairies have cats to help control rodents on the dairy. And whenever there's a little extra milk, they give it to cats. So cats began dying on these dairies. And lo and behold, the cats actually died in a very short period of time. Within a matter of 24 hours, they'll be dead because of the virus, which does, in a sense, cause severe brain damage in that period of time. But it's been found in dogs. We know that influenza viruses will replicate easily in swine, and both the avian types of viruses in the past have mixed with swine viruses. And the 1918 flu was actually that type of a major epidemic in the world. So I think what we want to do at WIFSS is find ways in which we can help now in determining really the true direction by which food can become contaminated, but also what do we need to do to make sure that animals that become infected, we need to get them out of the milking stream as soon as possible. Because if you consume raw milk, just like the cats, people can become infected with it. The good thing is most of the milk that is consumed in the US is pasteurized, and that will kill the virus in milk. So we don't have to worry about pasteurized products. But sometimes raw meat from animals finds its way into pet food. And there have been cases of at least cats and some dogs that have consumed raw meat and that had the virus in it. So you can see these pathogens have a way of finding their way through the food chain and through this pattern that involves animals, people, and the environment. So that is by utilizing the model that we have put forward here is you can identify animals before they show evidence of illness. And even with mastitis, you can pick it up maybe 4 or 5 days before it really shows up in the milk. Or in this particular case, they'll start showing clinical signs before, or you'll get virus isolation before the animals appear sick. But you notice they go off feed. You can pick up lameness. You can pick up a number of different things that may be involved with this. But this model gives us this time in which you can begin to control these things as long as the monitoring takes place with this digital twin, the one that was there for production, but also now the one that is picking up on behavioral and also on some of the other things, indicators of, say, the mastitis or the change in the consistency of the milk and the like. But that should help in delaying or at least helping mitigate the importance of the disease itself. So we see this as something that can be of great value to the dairy industry in trying to help control foodborne illness and also help control disease spread on the dairies. With that, I'll turn it on to Heather.
Thanks so much. Well, I am here to just round out our conversation today with just a little bit of a discussion about another component that's very important at the Western Institute for Food Safety and Security, and that is education, training, and outreach. So you heard a great description of the work that we have done in the area of basically like research and understanding these disease outbreaks. But what good is that if it stays in the university, right? So our mission is to get that information out to our target audiences. And so these tools like this that you saw demonstrated today are very important to us. And so we take our, we formulate different training programs to give people the experience that they need to think critically about the environment. So this One Health concept that Dr. Osborne described, it's our mission to get students that are at undergraduate levels all the way up through those who are working in the industry and actually in research themselves to have the opportunity to think with each other and discuss these complex issues and bring different perspectives on these issues together. So we think that this dairy model is a fantastic tool for that. And like Nelson mentioned, when you have something that's high stakes, like a disease outbreak, this is not something that you want people to do experimentally in the real world. So this model offers an opportunity to try it out without actually causing any harm. And I guess with that, I'll kind of wrap it up because I know we're a little tight on time. So Tracy, I will pass the ball back to you.
Thanks so much, Heather. And really just to close us out today, thank you so much to our partners at the Western Institute for Food Safety and Security, to our partners at MOSIMTEC. Thank you for being partners with the Southwest Regional Food Business Center and for sharing the results of this proof of concept. To engage with us at the Southwest Center, we have a QR code that is here. I'll also put a link in the chat. You can join our newsletter, stay up to date with us and things that are going on with the center. And then we want to invite you to our next webinar, and you can see on the right hand of the screen there is a QR code. You can sign up and register to join us. This is going to be in partnership with the University of Santa Cruz Center for Agroecology and the University of Nevada at Reno Extension, and brought to you by the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources. We'll be talking about obtaining your unique identification number, or UEI, in SAM.gov for folks that are looking to interact with federal funding or contracts. So that will be on March 4th at 3 p.m. And with that, I want to just say thank you so much to our presenters today. Thank you to the attendees, and I'll open it up for questions. You can go ahead and put anything into the chat, or go ahead and come off mute and ask questions.